All right. Yes. So thank you. Welcome to we have 6 of these a year, our speaker meeting. So welcome. I want to invite you to, I'm going to put our website in the chat and our helpline. So make sure that if you need our help, if you need help with mental health support, that we're here for you at NAMI. My name is Teresa Adams. I'm the executive director, and I'll just welcome you to our program. And before I do that, I am going to turn it over to Danu, who will talk about our spring campaign.
Hello, everyone. It's so nice to be in a Zoom room with you all this evening. At first, I just want to express deep gratitude for all of your many contributions, your generosity, your support, and care for one another. It's really what makes NAMI the special place that it is. So thank you for all that you do. You may have seen this week there was some pretty troubling new data out of the CDC that our teens are really struggling, especially our girls and our LGBTQ plus youth. NAMI is actually expanding our supports for teens and, in fact, youth, younger youth, and parents to increase early intervention and to support families to be empowered and to have the tools that they need to thrive. So I want to just invite you, if you feel moved, we will be opening up our spring campaign soon. You can help. Any gift amount makes a difference. Everything matters, and we're all in this together. So I'll put a link to our donate page in the chat, and if you feel so moved, we're very grateful for all of your support. And thank you so much. I'll hand it back to Therese.
Yes. Thank you. All right. So our speakers do this for us, free of charge as a gift to us. So we really want to thank our speaker tonight. But before I do that, I am going to read this. Okay. So this is going to be an exciting night, I think, talking about nutrition and food and how, daily we can help ourselves. So all questions will be answered at the end. And please put questions in the chat or wait to raise your hand until we open the question and answer Q&A section. So if you have a burning question, just put it in the chat. And we will get to it at the end. So I'm going to introduce our speaker now. So Maria Jose Hummel, Maria Jose Hummel, is a nutritionist, health educator, author, international speaker, and former engineer. She holds multiple degrees, which include a bachelor's in engineering from Cal Poly, a master's of science in nutrition from the University of Bridgeport, Connecticut, a master's in public health from San Jose State, a certification in plant-based nutrition from the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies at Cornell University. She holds a doctorate in neuropathy, as well as a doctorate in philosophy in natural medicine and International Institute of Original Medicine. She's a certified American Association of Lifestyle. She also wrote, she's the author of several books, including 2 vegetarian cookbooks, and she's appeared on multiple cooking shows and radio programs. And she also taught nutrition at the Adventist University of Chile and the Peruvian Union University. So she has, you can hear, she has a lot of background on the subject. So we welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I am very glad to be here with you this evening. This is a subject that obviously is very important for me when it comes to nutrition, but mental health is also very important for me. I am very sensitive to this because there's a lot of mental health issues in my family. My husband and I have dedicated time to doing, I would say, community programs that have to do with mental health and how to improve mental health through nutrition and lifestyle. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, because I'm also a health educator and a nutritionist. So there's a lot to speak about when it comes to nutrition and lifestyle and the brain. So I'm going to go ahead and start my PowerPoint so you can see the slides. And let me just adjust the screen size real quick. So I hope you can see the slides okay now. But I'm currently working for an organization called Eat for the Earth. And at the end of the presentation, I'm going to talk to you about the program. I'm a program coordinator for Community RX. And currently is mostly directed towards people who have chronic conditions. But honestly, the same nutrition that we use for Community RX is the kind of nutrition I'll be talking about when it comes to brain health as well. So whatever is good for the brain is good for the body, and vice versa, I guess you'll find out. So let me just start out mentioning that the brain, according to neuroscientists, is probably the most complex structure in the known universe, not just in the world. So the brain is incredibly complex and sophisticated. It's a biological, neurological structure that is incredibly complex. I mean, if we just think about the most powerful computer in the world, doesn't even come remotely close to what a human brain can do and the computing power of a human brain. So there are about 100 billion neurons in the brain, but each neuron is connected to other neurons by thousands of connections. And so there's an estimation, of course, nobody has counted one by one how many neurons there are in the brain, but we estimate that the connections between these neurons are probably in the trillions, probably around 100 trillion connections. So there's an incredible amount of pathways that these neurons are connected by. So that makes the brain, again, very complex, but at the same time, that means that a lot of things can go wrong. If you have something very complex, of course, a lot of things can possibly break in a system like that. So, so yes, of course, things can break in the brain. And today, in today's presentation, there's so much we can talk about when it comes to nutrition in the brain. In fact, when I do this presentation in other contexts, sometimes I also talk about neurological conditions such as Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease and how they are connected with nutrition. Yeah. But in the context of what we're talking about today for this organization, I think what we could really mostly concentrate on will be what we call mood disorders. So that would be depression and anxiety, which would be the most common ones, of course. We can go into a lot more, again, as I said, in regards to nutrition in the brain and mental health in general, but also even neurological health. But I think just concentrating on two things will allow us to go a little bit deeper into those two things and then learn more. So, and also I think it's more relevant for the group. But let me just start out pointing out something very interesting that has been found in the research literature with regards to nutrition, and it's the following. There's some nutrients that definitely can put us either at a higher risk or lower risk for certain mood disorders. So let me show you some examples of this. Let me, for instance, show you here we have omega-6 fatty acids. Okay, omega-6 fatty acids are part of the, of the normal diet for most people. And in both omega-6 and omega-3 are both considered essential. meaning we do not make them in our bodies. So we have to consume them. The problem is that we might consume, in the current sort of, I guess, modern diet, we consume way too much of one and too little of the other. And I think you might already guess which one we eat too much of and which one we eat too little of. But yes, in the diet, we mostly eat too much omega-6 fatty acid. Even though it's an essential fatty acid, we don't need it in the huge amounts we consume it. And the thing about omega-6 fatty acids is that they're known to be pro-inflammatory. Now, if they're pro-inflammatory, why would they be considered essential? Well, because inflammation is also an important part of our body. So if I cut myself, chopping onions, for instance, and I have a little cut in my finger, there's going to be inflammation there as a response. And that's part of the healing. So inflammation is part of healing. It's when we have too much chronic inflammation that things can go awry. But little inflammation as a response to injury is completely normal, desirable, part of the healing process. So it's absolutely essential. But when we have too much of a good thing, then it could become a bad thing. In this case, when omega-6 fatty acids are in excess, especially certain kinds of omega-6 fatty acids, what we find is that they can increase inflammation in the body too much. And I'll show you some of the studies that actually mention the word inflammation. But I just wanted to start out with this particular study that was done with pregnant women. And we can see that in the literature, we can probably generalize these findings above and beyond just the group of pregnant women, because we can see this also in other populations. But we can see in this particular study, which was done with pregnant women, is the excess of omega-6 fatty acids do indeed increase. And here's the title says everything really. They increase the likelihood of suicide risk and major depression. So, and it's talking about two specific kinds of omega-6 fatty acids, because omega-6 fatty acids are a big umbrella group that include a lot of individual fatty acids that are part of this group of omega-6 fatty acids. And what we find is these two particular omega-6 fatty acids. One is called arachidonic acid, and the other one is called adrenic acid. And I'll talk about the sources of these foods in a little bit, but I just wanted to emphasize that this has been found when it comes to the mental health risks, in particular, major depression and suicide risk. Now, the other fatty acid that I just mentioned, that there's two essential ones. I said omega-3 and omega-6. And here we're talking about omega-6 as being risky in too much large amounts. And that's because they're pro-inflammatory. The other type of of essential fatty acids is omega-3 fatty acids, which you're probably, most people are very familiar with omega-3 fatty acids. They're very popular. People even take supplements of omega-3 fatty acids, and they're anti-inflammatory. So they have kind of opposite functions in the body. One is pro-inflammatory, one is anti-inflammatory. The problem today in our current lifestyle and diet in general is that we have too much inflammation, not too little. So we really need to emphasize trying to get more of the omega-3 fatty acids. First of all, because we don't consume enough. We consume too much of the omega-6 and too little of the omega-3. Again, they're both necessary and essential, but we eat an excess of one and not enough of the other one. So here's good sources of omega-3 fatty acids: walnuts, flax seeds, even greens. Of course, we know that fish is a good source of omega-3 fatty acids. But the problem when it comes to mental health and health in general is if we consume too much of fish because of contamination issues, we might then be shooting ourselves in the foot, so to speak, because we might be getting too many chemicals that we don't want. So I try to emphasize the vegetable sources of omega-3 as safer in that sense, because they don't have the contamination issues and they have additional benefits. There's fibers in these seeds, such as flax seeds and chia seeds, that are very beneficial in other ways. They help to lower cholesterol, they help to lower glucose and other things. So the combination of fibers and antioxidants and omega-3 fatty acids of these two seeds, flax and chia, make it, in my view, a preferable source of omega-3 fatty acids. Now, let me show you some studies that have shown the incredible benefits of consuming a little bit more, again, because it's harder to find the omega-3. It's really easy to find omega-6, and that's why we eat too many of those. Whereas the omega-3s are a little bit harder to find, and that's why we don't consume enough. And so we're not getting the benefits of the omega-3s. This particular review article mentions that omega-3 fatty acids are proving to be effective against the treatment of major depression disorder right here and other psychiatric disorders. So that's interesting. And here's another one that talks about omega-3, again, fatty acids, in the context of anxiety symptoms. So here's the conclusions. Of course, we can spend a lot of time reading all the little details. We don't have time for that. So I'll just go straight to the conclusion. It says, this review indicates that omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids, that's what these letters mean, might help to reduce the symptoms of clinical anxiety. So that's very good to know, that there are things above and beyond just medications that can indeed help with these two major mood disorders. Now, going back to omega-6, I had mentioned before that they're pro-inflammatory. So let me give you a little bit more information on that. Here's another article in the Journal of Neurochemistry about inflammation in the brain. So we now think that inflammation, again, omega-6 fatty acids are pro-inflammatory. And when we have too much of something that's good, it can turn bad. And in the case of omega-6 fatty acids, and here we see the arachidonic acid mentioned again. So this was one of the major ones that I mentioned before. Arachidonic acid in excess amounts can maybe, and this is the hypothesis here, modulate inflammation in the brain. So we know inflammation in general leads to chronic conditions such as cardiovascular disease, such as diabetes type 2 especially, such as other inflammatory diseases that we know about, for instance, rheumatoid arthritis. Those are inflammatory diseases. Autoimmune diseases tend to also be inflammatory. So there's a host of conditions that are related to inflammation in regards to general health. But now we are finding out that this inflammation doesn't only happen from the neck down. Of course, it's going to involve the brain. The brain is part of the body. So inflammation in the brain can be problematic. And it could be mediated by consuming too much of these omega-6 fatty acids. And some sources might be worse than others because of the package the food comes in. So yes, I do get omega-6 fatty acids in, say, avocado. But the package of avocado tends to be a better package than, say, fried chicken. You see what I'm saying? So fried chicken, yes, it has omega-6 fatty acids, but it also has other things. It has cholesterol. It has excess animal protein, most likely, and it lacks certain things such as fiber and phytochemicals and antioxidants. Whereas the walnuts or the avocado come in a different package. And the package includes other beneficial things such as antioxidants, phytochemicals, fiber, and other things. So the package makes a big difference. When it comes to our arachidonic acid, it comes mostly from animal products such as chicken and eggs. And so in the context of more food, as opposed to just the parts of food, such as nutrients like fatty acids, when it comes to whole food groups, we see that consuming too much of the animal foods does indeed lead to inflammation in the brain, which can then be related to this increase in depression and other mood disorders. Now, the interesting thing is that this has been confirmed in other ways. Because, for instance, there was an intervention study, or a study of interventions, I should say, where they actually restricted some of the foods that are too high. And here we go. Again, you see right here, AA. AA does not mean Alcoholic Anonymous in this context. It means arachidonic acid. It's again, a pro-inflammatory omega-6 fatty acid. And what they did in this study is that they restricted the sources of this particular and other fatty acids. And they only did that for a short amount of time, short term, okay? And what we find, well, here's the conclusion, by the way. We see here that restricting these sources of fatty acids, such as meat, fish, and even fish, in this case, poultry, improve some domains of short-term mood state in omnivores. So people who consume not a vegan diet, but an omnivore diet, that means a diet that includes all kinds of different foods, such as animal foods. So, and here we see a table from this study, and it shows that arachidonic acid in particular decreased more when people were changed into a vegetarian diet as opposed to changed into a fish diet or an omnivorous diet. So the greatest change was for a vegetarian diet. We see the biggest decrease in arachidonic acid in this case. And that's probably what leads then to the results we saw. Very short-term results. It's a 2-week intervention. Only in 2 weeks we can see these results as far as the outcomes in mental health. So that's interesting to consider. Now, going back to the benefits of consuming more plants, there's a reason, there's mechanisms behind this. So in this study, they have found that people who go into a plant-based diet, they found actually very good results. This was a multi-center randomized controlled trial. Randomized controlled trial is the gold standard. So that's what people want to see when it comes to research. They want to see randomized controlled trials because they've considered the best quality evidence, really. And what we see is that in this large study, 10 corporate sites, in this case, it was done in the US with 292 participants. Anyway, what they found is that it reduces depression and anxiety. People who changed to a plant-based diet saw reductions, significant reductions in depression and anxiety. And we can go and maybe ask ourselves, well, what's the why? Why does that happen? And we can maybe say there was a decrease in the consumption of these pro-inflammatory nutrients, but there can also be other additional benefits of eating more plants. For instance, we know that, well, we try to when we tell people to eat more plants, we don't say eat more sugar, even though sugar comes from sugar cane and it's a plant. We try to tell people to eat more healthy foods derived from plants. So sugar, even though it's vegan, does not quite cut it. Same thing with white flour, you know, there's a lot of things that could be considered plants, but the way they are processed doesn't really make them healthy anymore. So when we talk about plants, I try anyway to emphasize whole foods. in their most natural state. So here in this picture, we see a lot of colors. We see a lot of green, dark green, orange, red. There's a lot of actual colors that are missing here, like purple and blue, like blueberries and blackberries and things like that, you know, eggplants. The very bright dark colors indicate there's pigments in those foods. And it turns out that those pigments, the orange, the yellow, the green, the blue, the red, all of those pigments in plants are actually antioxidants. Isn't that wonderful? So the more colorful food we eat, the more antioxidants we're eating, just because those pigments are the antioxidants. It turns out that antioxidants are actually excellent for mental health, not just for other things, such as, you know, decreasing the risk for cancer, for instance, or for inflammatory diseases, or for chronic diseases such as diabetes. Not only that, but also mental health. So here is, for instance, a study precisely that shows that when we eat more antioxidants, we see a decrease in depressive symptoms in US adults. So conclusion, in this case, they're talking about carotenoids, and those carotenoids are found, of course, in green leafy vegetables, like carrots, things like that. It leads to reduced levels of depressive symptoms. But many of us might be tempted to run to CVS and buy a big bottle of antioxidants. Well, I'm going to tell you, don't do that just yet, because here it is. Here's another study that says eating fruits and vegetables as opposed to taking supplements. You see right here, dietary supplements. Here they're telling us it's actually the fruits and veggies that lead to this decreasing depressive symptoms. Is not the supplements. There's something that gets lost in translation between food and supplements, probably because there's synergistic reactions that are going on with other nutrients. So yes, the vitamin C and the vitamin E and all these other phytochemicals are great, but there might be other things we don't even know about. It might even be the fiber in those foods. It might be the combination, you know, and the precise amounts that nature put in those fruits in the right package. Again, here's the concept of package. These fruits and vegetables come in a great package with fiber, with these compounds. They're really medicine. They're medicine in the food, you know. Hippocrates was right when he said that medicine should be your food and your food should be your medicine, because there's nutrients in these foods. So like, for instance, let's talk about folic acid. Folic acid deficiency can affect the brain, can affect brain function, and it's a risk factor for depression. Here, for instance, is a research study that talks exactly about that, folic acid and depression and anxiety. Sure enough, if you're low in folic acid, you have higher risk for depression and anxiety. But look at the foods that are high in folic acid. The greens. Greens are just like superfoods. And I don't like to say, you know, eat more kale. No, eat just all greens, more of, because all greens have properties and they have slightly different properties from each other. So the more variety of foods we eat, the more likely we are to get all these different, you know, nutrients. If you only eat kale, you're going to miss out on the benefits of broccoli or asparagus or what have you. So you want to eat a variety of greens to get your folic acid from, but not just the greens, the legumes. So your lentils, great source. Don't just eat one kind of lentil. If you eat the different kinds of lentils of all the different colors and the different shapes, you're more likely to get all these different nutrients, you know, slight different nutrients, slight different kinds of fiber, for instance, that are helpful for the gut microbiota. The more variety, the better when it comes to nutrient, you know, variety, and also fiber varieties for those friendly gut bacteria. Now, here's another thing I want to mention when it comes to brain health. Another nutrient that I want to mention that is not as commonly talked about as the omega-6 and 3 and the folic acid. And in fact, you may or may not have heard about this particular nutrient. It's actually an amino acid. And the name of the amino acid is tryptophan. And I want to mention it because tryptophan is, maybe you've never heard of tryptophan, but you probably heard of this. You probably heard of serotonin. Serotonin, of course, most people who deal with mental health issues have heard about, because some of the antidepressants are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. In other words, they increase the amount of serotonin in the brain, because the thinking goes that it's a low levels of serotonin that might lead to depression. So increasing the amount of serotonin in the brain can then improve mood. Well, it turns out that your body actually does make serotonin. And in fact, this tryptophan that I'm talking about, which is an amino acid. And when you think about the word amino acid, think protein, because amino acids are the building blocks for proteins. So whenever you hear amino acid, we're talking about proteins. So this particular amino acid is actually the precursor for serotonin. You may be thinking, well, maybe then I need to eat more tryptophan, more protein, right? Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. But let me just say that it seems that, yes, tryptophan, including more foods that have tryptophan, may lead to reductions in depression and anxiety. Let me just show you, for those of you who like to geek out on chemistry like me, how this conversion process happens. So maybe here we have the amino acid, and it becomes 5-HTP, which you might know about because some people buy it at the Staff of Life. It's a supplement, and 5-HTP then gets converted to serotonin. So these are the steps basically. And let me just show you this other thing here. This cartoon basically shows us what's going on in the brain. So here we see the connection between two neurons. It's called a synapse. A synapse is basically the space between two neurons, and that's how they connect. They connect through these synapses. So this is one neuron, and this is the other neuron, and this is how they connect through this space right here, because they send each other messages. And so serotonin is also called a neurotransmitter, because it's a chemical messenger that goes from one neuron to the other neuron. That's how the messages are sent in the brain. And so how it works is that the serotonin gets released from the one neuron that's releasing it, that's sending it, the donor, so to speak, neuron, and then it gets trapped, absorbed through these receptors. And what an antidepressant does is that it increases the amount of serotonin in the brain by blocking the reuptake. In other words, less of the serotonin goes back into the original neuron, and it becomes more available for the next neuron. That's basically what's going on. So you might be thinking, okay, that's good to know. So if I need more serotonin in my brain, I can just eat more protein. And you would be right. You would be right to think, okay, the more protein I eat, the more tryptophan I would get. But there's one little detail here, and the little nuance that most people aren't aware of, and it's this. Tryptophan is the hardest amino acid for the brain to absorb. Why? Well, it's just how it is. Life is like that. Sometimes it's not fair. Things sometimes are not fair, and poor tryptophan gets left out. It competes with other amino acids. So you eat a chicken breast or egg or cheese or drink some milk, and you will get a bunch of tryptophan. But here's the thing. You will get a bunch of other amino acids as well, because these are foods high in protein. So they're not just high in tryptophan, they're high in a bunch of other amino acids as well. So here's tryptophan competing with all these other amino acids that need to be absorbed as well. And it just so happens that the body preferentially absorbs these and leaves tryptophan to the end and absorbs it last. And when it comes to the war of absorption, tryptophan gets left out and gets absorbed the least when there's other competitors around. So here's what happens, okay? It's totally counterintuitive. That's why I'm mentioning this, because completely counterintuitive. You would think eating more protein would lead to more tryptophan in the brain, therefore more serotonin. But because of this competition, the exact opposite is true. It's completely counterintuitive. But hear me out. There's some research that actually shows this. The more protein we eat, protein sources that have a lot of these other competing amino acids, which by the way, they're being mentioned here with this acronym. LNAA actually means large neutral amino acids. The other, see here's even the word right here. Do you see it right here? Other large neutral amino acids, meaning the other ones, not tryptophan. And when we eat a lot of the LNAAs, it just so happens that tryptophan gets left out. So the more protein we eat, the less tryptophan we absorb. What? It makes no sense, but it actually does make sense if you actually read all the details. It's because of this competition. Whereas, if we eat more carbohydrates, now I'm not saying go out to Safeway and buy yourself a box of Oreo cookies, because that will make you feel better. It will, but it will come back to bite you. So don't do that. I'm not talking about these very refined, high sugar carbohydrates, highly processed carbohydrates, because the body doesn't care which carbohydrates we're talking about. So yeah, maybe you could eat a lot of sugar and it will increase serotonin, but we'll have a counter effect, and we want to avoid that. Carbohydrates in general do increase the amount of tryptophan in the brain, though. And it might have to do not just with the fact that there's less competing amino acids, but also that just insulin helps to uptake the tryptophan more. So I'm not going to go into the details, but basically the more carbohydrates we eat, the more serotonin we have. But again, package makes a difference. It's not the same thing to eat an Oreo cookie or an apple. Those are two different packages when it comes to carbohydrates. Just like we said with fats, right? Fats can come in the form of avocado or fried chicken, two different packages. When it comes to carbohydrates, same thing. There's good carbs, and I hate to say this, but there's actually bad carbs. It's the truth. You can't escape the fact that there's some high carbohydrate foods that are highly processed and they have detrimental effects to our brain and our body. It's just the truth. I hate to label things good or bad, but if we look at it from a very objective point of view, there's bad effects when we eat certain foods. That's just the pure truth. Okay, well, let me show you another study that talks about the exact same thing. Carbohydrate-rich foods and protein-poor food prevent deterioration of mood and cognitive performance. But that doesn't mean you have to go out and eat cake, because there's carbohydrate foods that are, again, high in carbohydrate, but are not detrimental to health. So we could eat things such as whole grains. And here's some examples I'm going to give you that are healthy whole carbohydrates. Quinoa, buckwheat, oats. You've probably heard of these, right? Even legumes, beans, lentils, garbanzos, even vegetables, of course, are low in calories, but they do have carbohydrates. Fruits, these are well-known healthy sources of carbohydrates. So when we eat these foods, it actually improves our mood because of, and the mechanism behind it, it's probably the tryptophan. It's probably the tryptophan. Confirmation, here, there's another study talks about high carbohydrate, low protein, increases ratios of tryptophan to the LNAs, which increases serotonin levels in the brain. And once again, carbohydrate consumption improved measures of depression, tension, anger, confusion, sadness, fatigue, alertness, and calmness. So I guess the takeaway point from this discussion is not to go out and eat a bunch of donuts and cookies. That's not the point. The point is, number one, I would be very careful going into low carbohydrate diets because they're known to have an effect in certain people, maybe not everyone, but certain more susceptible individuals might have some negative side effects in their mood when they go on low carbohydrate diets. So it's known that certain people have more irritability, for instance, when they go on low carb diets such as keto or Atkins or paleo or what have you. So I would be careful. If I'm a person who has susceptibility to mood disorders such as depression or anxiety, to go on long-term low carbohydrate diets because it could decrease the well-being feelings that come with that serotonin that you get with the carbs. Again, I would concentrate on very healthy carbohydrates, not on the sugar. But I would be careful to reduce carbs too much because that might lead to a reduction in tryptophan in the brain, which can then reduce serotonin in the brain, and it could be a risk factor for depression and anxiety. And that has been shown. Low carb diet, long term, when compared to a low fat diet, for instance, when they compared mood and cognitive function at the end of 1 year, there was a favorable effect on the low fat diet, whereas compared to a low carbohydrate diet, because low carbohydrate diet had a less beneficial effect in mood and cognitive function. Now, I'm going to tell you though that there are some foods that are high in tryptophan. Hear me out. Now, this is going to be a little bit, you're going to think like, wait, you just said not to eat a lot of foods that have a lot of tryptophan. But here's the thing. There's some food sources of tryptophan that are not high in the competing amino acids. Let me say that again. There's food sources of tryptophan that are just higher in tryptophan ratio compared to the other competing amino acids. So there are actually foods that you can eat as a source of tryptophan in particular that has a good enough ratio of tryptophan to other amino acids that you can actually increase the amount of tryptophan in the brain without decreasing the serotonin and having the other effects. So here it is. Look at these foods: tofu, pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds, almonds. If we were to look at a table comparing the ratio of tryptophan to other amino acids, we would see that compared to, say, chicken or fish or chicken or milk or cheese, or these foods that are normally thought of as good sources of tryptophan, if we actually compare these foods you see on the screen to those, you would see that these have a higher ratio of tryptophan to other amino acids. Therefore, you will actually absorb more of the tryptophan if you eat tofu than if you eat, let's say, chicken, or if you eat a handful of pumpkin seeds compared to, let's say, milk, cow milk, because of the ratio. Okay, so I just wanted to let you know that when it comes to mood disorders, a good maybe strategy would be to eat a diet that is high in healthy carbs, supplemented with really good sources of tryptophan. So for instance, eating a lot of those whole grains that I mentioned, the quinoa, the buckwheat, you know, the whole wheat or barley or oats, whole grains and legumes. Those are great sources of healthy carbs. And then you supplement that with these foods and others that are higher in tryptophan, but not necessarily in the other competing amino acids, then you would have the benefit of both. You would have the high carbs that will let you absorb more of the tryptophan, and you would be supplementing with foods that have a lot of tryptophan. So you would get a higher absorption of tryptophan that way. So that could be a dietary strategy for adding more tryptophan and therefore increasing sort of naturally the amounts of tryptophan in your brain. So that's good to know. Having said that, let me just talk about the dangers maybe of consuming too much fat in the diet. So a high fat diet, especially high saturated fat, could impair proper circulation in the brain, can lead to decrease in oxygenation, therefore, in the brain, which could be a risk factor for mood disorders, neurological disorders as well. So let me show you a study that actually showed a little bit of that. A high fat diet, such as a keto diet, is not that I want to, talk a lot about a lot of bad things about the keto diet. I particularly don't recommend it because of this, because of the higher risk for mental health issues and mood disorders with, high fat diet. So in this case, they did an animal study where they found that a high fat diet promotes depression-like behavior in mice. And the possible mechanism of that has to do with the hypothalamus, which is a part of your brain, a very important part of your brain. Now, there's other potential mechanisms for that. It might have to do with also the effect of high fat in the gut. So we know that a high fat diet, especially one that is low in fiber and high in saturated fat in particular, can negatively affect the gut microbiota. That means the gut bacteria that now we're finding more and more and more information about and how important it is. There's actually a connection between the gut and the brain, and we think it's mediated by the gut bacteria. Once you eat a lot of these good foods, that have prebiotics, these non-absorbable carbohydrates, these fibers, these resistant starch, these are types of carbohydrates that cannot be digested. So what happens? They go straight to the gut, and the gut bacteria ferments these fibers and produces these metabolites that are great for our brain and for our health in general. So when we eat a low fiber, high fat diet, for instance, let me show you, here's another study that talks about fatty acids and brain inflammation. And it's talking about a high fat diet and how it negatively affects mood, such as, could affect symptoms of depression and anxiety, probably because it produces, again, what I talked about at the beginning, this pro-inflammatory condition, this inflammatory response in the brain, this neuroinflammation that can then be linked to mood disorders. Now, let me show you a picture of this lovely lady. This lady has a really good story because she was somebody who struggled with depression a lot and being overweight. So she says she started dieting when she was like 9 years old. She started dieting, and she always struggled with weight. By 2013, she was 55, and she was at the end of her rope. This is how she described it. She was at the end of her rope. She was in the grip of lifelong depression that had gone from bad to worse. And not only that, but she had physical ailments. So she had feet and knee ache. She's only 4'11", so I'm short. She's a tiny little bit shorter than me. I'm only 5 feet. She's 4'11". So she would be one of the few individuals in the world that I can, look down as opposed to up. Everybody I have to look up to. So she would be slightly shorter. But anyway, at 4'11" and weighing 220 pounds, That's a BMI of 44. She was struggling with weight a lot, and that's what led to her knee problems, her foot problems. She was calorie counting, doing portion control. Nothing worked for her. But the one thing that she started doing at around this age right here, this left picture, she heard about the practice of mindful eating. So she started paying attention to food and the thoughts and feelings that came with the foods that she was eating. So she was just being curious, just observing. She wasn't trying to change her diet anymore because nothing had worked. So she was just looking. She was just observing how she felt with everything she ate. That was the first step. And then she watched a documentary. It's an old documentary now, a classic kind of. Maybe many of you have seen it, I'm not sure, but it's called Forks Over Knives. And it talks about a plant food diet, whole food plant-based diet. And the first time she watched it, it didn't quite click. She was still eating a lot of cheese and dairy in her, and she was just in denial. She definitely was addicted, honestly, to her cheese. So she's like, I'm not going to stop eating cheese. There's no way. But she thought, okay, what if I just try it for 2 weeks? So she started to investigate the connection between inflammation and depression. And she watched some videos online, whatever. And then she's like, okay, maybe I'll try it for 2 weeks. And so it was hard because she loved cheese. Cheese is like a drug for her. And so she tried 2 weeks, and wouldn't you know it, she lost like 7 pounds in like 2 weeks. And that's like a lot for very quick, right? And at the end of the 2 weeks, she was like, wow, something's going on here. What? And so she extended her experiment for another month. So she's like, okay, if I could do it for 2 weeks, I could do it for a month. And she kept losing weight. So she decided to okay, after a month, like, I don't want to let go of this. I'm just going to go for 6 months. So she extended it just to make sure that this wasn't just a fluke, right? So she kept going for 6 months. And interestingly enough, at the end of the 6 months is when the cravings came back in full force. So she really wanted pizza, she wanted cheese, she wanted ice cream, really, really, really bad. She was just craving. They were intense and relentless cravings. She was probably going through withdrawal symptoms, what she thinks. Cheese was her drug and she wanted it. But watching Forks Over Knives again helped her to kind of get through this period and kept her motivation going. And eventually she just gave it up forever, and gradually made other changes, like eating more vegetables. Like you could see here on the right hand side, she's got a big bunch of chard, and she now grows her own greens or whatever. But since she started eating more whole food plant-based, this is a 5-year difference between this picture and this picture. She lost over 90 pounds. Her lifelong depression, this is what's really relevant for today's presentation, her lifelong depression lifted. And that meant that she could engage in more active lifestyle. She started running. I mean, she was like 55, she was 60 by then. She started running. She started running 10Ks and numerous 5Ks. And she had to switch to biking because her knees, she eventually figured out that the damage to her knees they were probably too damaged by a life of obesity. So she had to switch to biking instead. But now she wants to help other people. And so she has a healthier lifestyle. She earned the same certificate that I earned, which is the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies at Cornell, which is a plant-based nutrition certificate. And now she helps other people. She's like a coach, and she likes to help people that are in similar situation, with depression and overweight and all that, and maybe at food addiction, to overcome that. So not only is it possible, but it can change your life. So I just wanted to give that little bit of a testimony of life transformation. Now, just to finish, because this was a nutrition presentation, I talked about, fats and proteins and carbs And of course, the antioxidants, that means the fruits and vegetables, and the benefits of plants, because most whole plants are loaded with antioxidants and phytochemicals and fiber, which helps your microbiota, which also helps your brain. So all these parts of plants work synergistically to help your mood. But I just want to mention real quick in the last few minutes, other important factors that because you can eat maybe a perfect diet and you're still not feeling well. And it could be other things. It could be because you're only sleeping 4 hours a night, and that's going to affect your mood. Or it could be because it's winter and you're in the dark all day in your room and you're not coming out and getting enough sunlight, and that could be affecting as well. So there's other lifestyle factors. Being certified as a lifestyle medicine professional, I like to expand a little bit beyond just food. So let me just briefly mention other things that I think are very important. So one important thing is, as you might imagine, sleep. So chronic insomnia is a risk factor for developing anxiety and depression. So if there are medical conditions that are leading people to chronic insomnia, those need to be looked at as well. So it could be sleep apnea, who knows, there's all kinds of things, but there's definitely what they call sleep hygiene. You can look it up. I don't have time to go into it too much, but you can look up sleep hygiene. Sleep hygiene has to do with things we can do. For instance, we can not have these very bright lights on at 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. Because when you do that, when you have these bright lights on very late into the night, you're telling your brain, you're sending a signal to your brain that it's still day. So of course, then you try to go to sleep and you're like, for another 2 hours, you can go back to sleep or can, go to sleep. Same with these screens, your computer, your phone, your laptop, your tablet. These are screens that are sending these rays of light right through your eyes into your brain. And if you have a lot of that blue light that comes right out of these screens, is telling your brain it's still daylight. So you need to change it, to night mode or whatever, to reduce the blue so your screen will look a little bit more orange. Very important. Try to reduce the lights at home. Try not to, eat very late. If you eat, at 9 and go to sleep at 10, there's no way in the world all that food in the stomach would have been digested. So what happens, you go into sleeping where really you should be resting. You should be getting all these rejuvenative benefits of sleeping, these detoxing. It actually detoxes your brain. It flushes your brain out, when you sleep. But if we have food in our stomach, all that energy has to go into digesting the food. So there's less energy available for these very important cleansing, detoxing, repairing, regenerating, rejuvenating aspects of sleep. You're not getting it. You're just not getting it. So try not to eat late. Try to maybe take a hot bath, because that will actually, the hot bath, incredibly enough, will actually decrease the core temperature. And it's very important. Temperature is very important for sleep. If you're sleeping in an 85-degree room, you're not getting good quality sleep. Your body needs to be cool in order to get good quality sleep. So you want to keep that thermostat at 65. Actually, my husband cringes when I say 65 because he's got the 5 sweaters on. But I'm like, I can't sleep in a hot room. I need the cool room. So, and the other thing is, they know that exposing yourself to light early in the morning. So if you get up at 8 a.m. or 7 a.m., for instance, and you don't get out of the house and stay outside for at least 10 minutes until, say, 11 a.m. or 12, you are missing out. Because when you go outside, let's say half an hour to an hour most after waking up, let's say you wake up at 7 and go outside latest by 8 and stay outside for like 10 minutes, what happens is that bright light in the morning is actually resetting your circadian clock in your brain. It's sending a signal to your brain to, first of all, wake up, and it resets your circadian clock. Therefore, you start producing melatonin 16 hours later. Interesting. Melatonin, we know it's very important for falling asleep. And taking it as a supplement is not necessarily recommended. Some people need it, but it's not necessarily super recommending taking it long term. You want to produce your own. And the way to do it is to expose yourself to bright light in the morning. And that resets your clock. And it tells your brain to start producing melatonin 16 hours later. So just FYI. Anyway, there's a lot of things you can do. Look up sleep hygiene, and you'll find that sleeping is very important, okay? Very important for mental health, very important for emotional control, mental health. I mean, on and on. I can talk about this for too long, so I won't. The other very important thing, of course, is physical exercise. So just physical exercise, when they have done the comparative studies with physical exercise and antidepressants work faster at first. So yeah, week, 2 weeks, boom, you're getting the results. But 6 months in, same results, both groups. The exercise works slower. So if you're in an emergency situation where you're at risk of, I don't know, self-harm, maybe you want to start off with a medication. But keep in mind that the exercise has very similar effects without the side effects. And 6 months in, it's exact same results as the antidepressants. So just FYI, and if you go out to walk in the morning and you're getting the bright light and the exercise, well, that's 2 benefits in one. So just FYI. Relieves, it's known to relieve anxiety, and especially when it comes to depression, walking is perfect. But when it comes to anxiety, the more vigorous the exercise, the better. So maybe jogging is a little bit better than just walking for anxiety. But for depression, any exercise is really good. And now we know that even strength training is good for your brain. We didn't know that until very recently. Again, the exposure to sunlight or bright light, it's called bright light therapy. Here it is, bright light therapy. You can do it with one of those little lights, which in fact I have, because I used to have seasonal affective disorder. I still kind of have it, but I manage it better. But the seasonal affective disorder, people in the Nordic countries like Norway, they use these bright lights. They have to, because they only get like 4 hours of sunlight in some of these places, right? So they have to use these bright lights. But we're in California. We're not in Norway. We can go outside and we're going to get enough sunlight, even if it's cloudy. Now, if it's raining, cats and dogs, okay, don't go outside. But if it's any other day, you can go outside, even if it's cloudy. And that bright light from the outside is much brighter than any little box. And it has just a better effect in your brain. So I would recommend, not only for seasonal affective disorder, but anybody really who is struggling with mental issues, to use bright light therapy for depression. So it's known to work. It's been proven over and over and over again. Okay, after saying those things, I just want to mention real quick the program that I'm currently running at my work. I work for Eat for the Earth, well, I don't even know if I mentioned it at the beginning. I think I mentioned it, but I work for Eat for the Earth, which is an environmental organization in Santa Cruz County. But we're also doing this sort of more health approach. And we are running a program called Community RX. Community RX is a 10-day immersion program. So we put everybody on a 10-day program where they can eat more plants, just like I mentioned during the presentation. And we do it right now. We're using it mostly for chronic conditions such as diabetes, cardiovascular disease. So anybody who's heart problems, stroke, high blood pressure, and any of these things improve immediately. So we take biomarkers. We do biomarkers at the beginning and at the end of the 10 days. And I'll show you some results with the first. We barely started doing this. This is a brand new program. The first round was in December. So this is brand new. But we'll show you some results of the very initial, early results from the initial rounds of the program. But it's a 10-day immersion program where we help you to eat plant-based for 10 days. We give you recipes, support, daily informative videos. Again, we do before and after biometrics. We ask for a donation just to cover the cost of the biometric supplies, which are kind of expensive because we actually measure the triglycerides. We do a whole lipid panel. So here's our first round. It was done with a Spanish population in Watsonville, California. And we measured their cholesterol, LDL, triglycerides, fasting glucose, blood pressure, and weight, therefore BMI. And we saw improvements in almost every category. We had individuals who had qualified as too high cholesterol, above 200. At the end, we had 0. We had people who had too high LDL cholesterol. At the end, we had 0. Triglycerides went down in general, even for some people did increase because they thought plants, that means I could eat more rice, and they were eating a lot of rice or a lot of potatoes or what have you. Their triglycerides went up a little bit, but it does go down if you stay on a very healthy diet. Fasting glucose went down. We had some diabetic at the beginning. That number went down. We had a lot of pre-diabetics. 68, almost 69% of our people were pre-diabetic. Some of them had no idea, but that went down as well. The systolic and diastolic blood pressure both went down, and the weight, well, 10 days, it went down a little bit. Of course, if they stay on the, at least a mostly plant-based diet for long-term, it's going to go down more. So again, we invite everybody to eat mostly plants for 10 days. After that, they can choose to, remain mostly plant-based or whole plant, whatever they want. But at least now they know, they know the benefits of eating in this way, which is all these biometrics. But now we know that for mental health, that's also very important because the body is connected to the brain, they're part of one. So whatever's good for the body is also good for the brain, as we saw during the presentation. So if you'd like to learn more about it, you can contact us at eatfortheearth.org. If you put / and then put community RX, you can fill out an interest form, and then you'll be added into our database. And we're currently doing a round, so we're right in the middle of it. We'll probably do the next one in March. We're working with some of the health clinics in Watsonville. So a lot of the people we got for this current round are actually our patients of Salud para la Gente, which is a clinic in Watsonville, but we're also working with Watsonville Health Center. We're looking forward to partnering with some of the agencies in Santa Cruz City because we have to we also have to do something in Santa Cruz because the city of Santa Cruz helped to pay for the grant. So we have to do something in Santa Cruz. But generally in Santa Cruz County, the county is the biggest funder for this program. So we're definitely open to working with anyone in the community. So let us know if you're interested about, in eating this way, because it will help not only your body, but then of course your brain and your mental health. So thank you for your time. Thank you for having me. Again, thank you to NAMI for inviting me to give this presentation. As you can tell, I'm very passionate. I could talk for hours, but I think my time is up, so I'll stop sharing my screen. And if we probably have some questions, so now it's the time. So thank you again for paying attention and for being here. And hopefully this was something that was helpful and beneficial for you.
Thank you so much, Maria. And yes, we have been getting some questions in the chat, so I will read those aloud right now. The first question is, does organic kale powder have the omega-3s, or does it have to be fresh?
Oh, I'm sure it has omega-3s because they don't get destroyed by making the kale into powder or dehydrating. I'm sure the making of the kale powder involves probably drying the kale and then making it into a powder, and that process doesn't get rid of all the nutrition in it. So a lot of the nutrition is in fact preserved, and and it would still preserve the omega-3 fatty acids. Of course, not in as high concentration as, for instance, flax or chia, which are higher. So it's a higher concentration, so it's a better source per se, but you would still get some with the greens, such as kale and other leafy greens. So yes, it's a good source.
Thank you. Can chia and flax seeds be consumed every day, and what quantity?
Absolutely can be consumed every day. I recommend consuming them every day. It doesn't have to be both every day. It could be, one day chia, one day flax. Hemp seed is another very good source of omega-3 fatty acids. So those are three seeds that you can put in the rotation, if you will. I would say for the general population, I usually recommend 1 to 2 tablespoons. But people with, say, inflammatory conditions sometimes need to eat quite a bit more, like maybe double, so 2 to 4 tablespoons. And I know of a doctor, a medical doctor, who has a protocol for people with very serious inflammatory conditions, such as, for instance, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis. So these are autoimmune diseases. And she herself had lupus, and she calls herself now lupus free because she doesn't have it. And her protocol includes, it depends on what condition, but it could go up to half a cup a day for some people, just to reduce the inflammation really quick. So for some people with inflammatory conditions, it could be more. But I would say for the general population, 1 to 2 tablespoons a day is optimal. Now, some people might want to take a more concentrated form of omega-3 fatty acids, and I would recommend in that case, like a omega-3 supplement that is plant-based from algae. So the fish get it from the algae, so you can get it from the original source if you get like algal oil sourced omega-3 fatty acids. So that's, if you were going to go that route, I would say get an algae supplement, like an algae oil supplement, and that would be a very good source of omega-3 fatty acids as well.
Thank you. Does almond milk have tryptophan?
Good question. Probably some, not as concentrated as consuming the almonds, because if you've ever made almond milk at home, it's very diluted, of course. So let's say I don't know, the way I've made it before is like I use like half a cup of almonds for like 5 cups of water. So there's a dilution there. And it's also, you also have to put it through, some kind of a screening, you have to put it in a nut bag or nut milk bag or something. So you're kind of losing some of the pulp and the fiber. So some of the tryptophan can be trapped into that fiber. So you might lose a little bit of that in that sense as well. So eating the whole almond will give you more than just drinking the milk, but some of it will be in the milk for sure.
If we eat protein, do we need to eat carbs along with meat, or can they be eaten separately during the day?
That's a very good question. I would eat them together so that you are optimizing your absorption of that of the tryptophan. Of course, again, you're going to have that competition. So if you're eating, like, say, meat, chicken, red meat, or have you, you're going to absorb a little bit less. But if you're only eating proteins and you're not eating any carbs, what the carbs do is that, of course, since they help to release some of that insulin, what the insulin does is that it not only helps to absorb the carbohydrates into the cells, but also the protein. So some of that protein will be also going up into your brain. So I think it does help with absorption if you eat together as opposed to just eating the meat.
Thank you. We have 2 questions about soybeans. The first is, are soybeans also good sources of tryptophan?
Yes, they are. They're a good source of omega-3 fatty acids as well. So when compared to animal proteins, the plant proteins are beneficial in many ways. So they have more fiber, they have just a better nutritional profile in many ways. And the best source of, like, if you're looking at concentrations or you're looking at ratio of protein, probably the best one is soy, just because of the higher percentage of protein in soy as opposed to other legumes. And then we're finding out so many benefits of soy. Unfortunately, there's a lot of myths about soy and a lot of them unfounded. And I had to do like a debunking kind of video in Spanish. There's a lot of them in English. That's why I did it in Spanish. But there's a lot of debunking videos with regards to soy and some of the myths out there. It's actually very helpful for people who are at high risk for, like, say, hormone-related cancers like breast cancer or prostate cancer. So it's actually helpful for preventing these cancers and for heart disease and a lot of things. So yes, soy is a great source of protein, as well as omega-3 fatty acids and fiber and a lot of other nutrients. So highly recommended.
Thank you. And
but the lesser, the less refined forms, of course. So, it's not the same to eat, like I don't know, Beyond Burger. I don't even know if it has soy, but if it had, it's a less desirable form than, say, edamame or something like that.
thank you. I'm gonna circle back to almonds real quick. We have a question that says, how many almonds are recommended per day?
Well, that's a great question. I'd say for most people, so when I say most people, like not athletes or pregnant women, for instance, but most people, 1 handful is perfect. So that's about an ounce. Or if you're gonna, do grams, it's about 28 grams, which is for most people a handful. You want to eat in front of the TV and eat like a whole 2-pound bag or something of almonds. That's way too much. You want to do about a handful a day, and that's what most people will be fine with.
Thank you. Someone asks, I heard that for people who have hyperthyroidism and depression, it is not recommended to eat tofu and soybeans. What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, there was a great study done last year or published last year, and it was a review study. And it was in the realm of review studies is the biggest one I've ever seen. It included 417 clinical studies and observational studies, so a lot of good information. And it was about soy. And it was like 60-some pages of the study. So again, in the realm of studies, this was a huge study. And it's very comprehensive. And they go, part by part or issue by issue. And when it comes to the thyroid, they actually examine all the clinical studies with regards to thyroid function and soy. And they found that for most people, eating soy does not affect the thyroid, except with a few exceptions. People who have issues with thyroid because of iodine, whether it's excessive, but in most cases is deficiency. An iodine deficiency can cause some issues with the thyroid. In those cases, you might need to be careful with the amount of soy. But for most people, so you might want to make sure you read the study. I guess I can try. You can contact me through my webpage, or I can tell you my webpage is, my personal webpage is healthfortoday.net. So if you want to contact me through there, I can give you the study. I can send it to you. But it's very few cases where you would have to decrease the amount of soy, not completely get rid of it, but maybe decrease or just, make sure you're eating the proper portions. For most people, even with thyroid issues, they can eat soy without a problem.
Can you speak about the possible link between nightshade vegetables and inflammation, and if there is one?
There might be for some individuals. So these would be inflammatory conditions, maybe like arthritis and lupus and things like that. But the interesting thing is that a lot of people who go on a protocol like the one I mentioned by the name of the lady that I mentioned before, her name is Brooke Goldner, if you want to look her up, and she had lupus. And she helps people with very serious inflammatory conditions and autoimmune diseases. And for the most part, people who go on a protocol like that can actually eat nightshades without a problem. So it might have to do with the quality of the overall diet that could play a part. So if you're already bringing down the inflammation by consuming less pro-inflammatory foods, it might be that nightshades play less of a role as opposed to just eating just the regular diet that most people eat. So I think it depends on the context. When people go on a more anti-inflammatory protocol, and that means more greens, more plant foods in general, more antioxidants, and less pro-inflammatory foods such as the animal foods and the saturated fat. If you go on a kind of protocol like that, then the nightshades seem to fall away as a major factor. So it depends on the contents, and each person is different. So you might want to, test it out and see how you react to that. But it could be for some people. So again, it depends on the context.
Are there any links between kidney health and how food components are metabolized for the brain? If so, what does that look like for someone who has had a kidney removed?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because people with kidney issues have some, well, it depends. If the person had, so it depends on what kind of problems the person is having. So if a person is having kidney failure or kidney issues, but without having to go to dialysis yet, it's very likely that a change in diet can affect the deterioration of kidney function, because there's been studies where diabetics, for instance, tend to have a high rate of kidney failure. So people whose kidney function was deteriorating, these were all diabetics, and the study that I'm mentioning, these were all diabetics whose kidney function was just going down dramatically. And they were changed to a whole food plant-based diet. And after the shift, if you graph the kidney function, after the shift, you see, well, before the shift, you see this going downward trend. But once you hit the shift, then the downward trend is either stopped, or in some cases, it's reversed. So in some people, not the majority, but in some individuals, the kidney function actually improved after the shift. For most people, it stopped deteriorating. So the kidney function or the kidney deterioration was halted. And we know, for instance, that people who are experiencing kidney failure, sometimes they're put into a very low protein diet, because we know that protein puts an extra extra weight, or I guess extra stress on the kidneys, because they have to process all this protein. So a low protein diet sometimes helps to stop the deterioration of kidney function. So yes, in fact, we know that the same kind of diet that actually increases tryptophan in the brain can actually help improve kidney function. So it's interesting to note those parallels there.
Is it true for some people that even if they eat a plant-based diet, their body still produces bad cholesterol?
Yes, depends on what kinds of fat sources you include in your plant-based diet. So interestingly enough, the very oil that's become super, super popular in the last few years is coconut oil. And just so happens that coconut oil is very high in saturated fat. Most people either don't know that, or they've been told, that it's super healthy, so they have no idea. And when you compare like coconut oil to, say, lard, and lard is, we know, a very unhealthy fat. So we try to, most people don't eat a lot of it because it's known to, increase the risk for cardiovascular disease or whatever. But if you compare coconut oil to lard, coconut oil is almost twice the percentage of saturated fat as lard. I particularly don't recommend the oil. I prefer people eat coconut, like you can go out and eat a coconut. And that, again, it's the package. It's all about the package. When you eat a coconut, you're getting the fiber, you're getting protein, you're getting nutrients, you're getting, the antioxidants, whatever else nutrients are in the coconut, you're getting them. But when you isolate just the fat, you're getting rid of all these other benefits, and you're only consuming the fat. And in that case, that isolated fat, just like isolated carbohydrates, like sugar is an isolated carbohydrate. In the case of fat, it's oil. And in the case of coconut oil, it just so happens that it's a very high saturated fat oil. That's why when you buy it at the store, it's a solid as opposed to a liquid. So you could tell when oil is more saturated at room temperature. If at room temperature it's solid, it's more saturated. Same thing with palm oil. And of course, palm oil has all kinds of other environmental horribleness. So I would say stay away from palm oil. But coconut oil, isolated from the plant is the coconut, it could be detrimental to health because of the high amount of saturated fats. So eating a lot of, it's been shown in research, eating a lot of coconut oil can increase your cholesterol. Eating a lot of oil in general, because when we eat a lot of oil, a lot of fried food, even if there's 100% vegan, but you eat a lot of fried food or just foods that contain a lot of fat in them, you're going to be forcing your liver to make more cholesterol. You'll be making more endogenous cholesterol. Your body is making more cholesterol when you eat a lot of fat, because that fat needs to be digested. And so your body needs to make basically bile acids to digest all the fat. And that means your body has to make more cholesterol because the bile acids are made from cholesterol. So you're forcing your liver to produce more cholesterol when we increase the amount of fat we eat. So you can eat 100% vegan plant-based diet and still have high cholesterol. Yes, that's possible. That is possible.
Thank you so much, Maria. And then we had 2 more questions specifically about some of the work and studies you were talking about.
Mhm.
One person is curious about what the name of the certificate is that you mentioned when you were talking about the testimony of that woman, and maybe what her name was, they're asking as well.
I don't know the name. I looked it up it's probably in the website. It's called Forks Over Knives, where I got her testimonial. So forksOverKnife.com. You can find testimonies and you'll find hundreds, and she's there. But the certificate she got is the plant-based nutrition certificate from Centers for Nutrition Study, or I guess you would call it T. Colin Campbell's Center for Nutrition Studies at Cornell. So it's Cornell University certificates. Under that, there's a bunch of certificates, and one of them is plant-based nutrition. And so, yeah, anybody can take it, and it's a great certificate to get. So Center for Nutrition Studies at Cornell.
Thank you. And then the other question was about the doctor who cured herself from lupus. And I think I remember you saying her name is Brooke Goldner.
Correct, Brooke Goldner. And you can look it up. Her book, she has 2 books. One of them is called Goodbye Lupus, and the other one is called Goodbye Autoimmune Disease, or something like that. It's really easy to find. And she has she's all over social media. She's on Instagram and YouTube and Facebook, and you can actually have a one-on-one consultation, although she's very busy. So you might be able to get more into like a groups session than a one-on-one. But I know she does consultations and stuff. So you can, if you have something very serious like lupus or rheumatoid arthritis or any autoimmune disease, I would look her up, follow her.
Thank you so much for being here. We are so grateful to have someone as educated on this subject as you come to speak to our group. I am going to be putting a link to a survey in the chat. For those who are participating, please give us feedback on how you feel this presentation went. And I'm also going to put the Eat for the Earth link in the chat as well for anyone who would be interested in the program that Maria was telling us about.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
So thank you all so much for coming. And if you have any further questions, feel free to put them in the chat now, and I can get those answers for you at a later time. This meeting was recorded and it will be on our website for you to reference at a later time if you want to. So thank you all so much for coming, and thank you, Maria, for presenting.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a great pleasure to be here.